Hey, what's up, guys? This is going to be a free YouTube tutorial for everyone covering per light AOVs that just recently got added to Redshift. I just want to get it out of the way. Thanks for everybody that's supporting my Patreon. You guys are doing great. And if you guys haven't checked that out yet, check out my Patreon page. It's mostly covering Houdini and Redshift, kind of a pipeline, but I just put up cool stuff for free sometimes, or websites or resources that I find interesting. So definitely give it a follow and just check out some of the stuff I put up there. But anyways, that said, it's been a while since I've last made a YouTube for Maya Redshift video, and a lot has changed. Redshift has basically been adding tons of new features. There's just tons of new stuff now, and so I will be covering these every so often now that we've got the render view, we've got noise and volumes, and fog volumes, we've got custom AOVs, we've got per light AOVs, we've got the denoiser from Optics and Altus, we've got just tons of stuff coming around. And so CryptoMat should probably be here in the next week or two, and there's just more features just being thrown in. And so for this quick little tutorial introduction, I'm going to just go into per light AOVs just because this is really cool stuff, and I think a lot of people have been waiting for this. And so just a quick introduction on how to get per light AOVs and get this rolling. And so, as many of you know, Corona and Maxwell and V-Ray have something called light groups and light mixing, and this is similar but more powerful in that you get more options. And so Redshift's per light AOVs actually are more like Arnold and RenderMan's, in that you can split up every AOV per light, while in V-Ray you're limited to only a couple AOVs, and in Corona and Maxwell it's basically just the beauty, which you can split up. And so minimal control, while this system uses pretty much any AOV you can think of, you could split it up. And so we're going to use just this old scene I've got laying around. And so we've got some lights and stuff, and right out of the bat, first let me just open up the render view. So I've got this render I made a little while ago, and actually let's start from scratch and let's just get rid of all the AOVs we've got. So now we've got nothing here in our active AOVs list, so we're going to do this from nothing. So if I were to just hit render right now, and let's just move that out of the way. So we've got the render going. We've got just the beauty. We don't have anything else being rendered. And if you guys haven't used Redshift in a while, we've got this neat new render view. So we could do IPRs, check out our AOVs. We've got RGB, alpha, cropping tool, bucket mode, progressive mode, freezing, adaptive tessellation, a bunch of stuff here. We could do percentage fixed scaling. We can now use LUTs. There's actually a LUT applied right now, so if I switch over to just sRGB, it's washed out, but I'm using a LUT. And so you could control the LUT strength, all that post-effect stuff that everybody's been asking about for a long time. So this is all available now, and except for bloom and glare, which I'm sure will arrive pretty soon since everyone's requesting it. And so, anyways, I'll probably do a tutorial just on the render view, so you could see how it works in the future. Just covering all the features and options that the render view has. We even have a flip option, which is amazing, because I love flipping over just to check composition, just hitting the H key. But anyways, so this is our base render we've got going here, and cool. So we've got nothing else in our AOVs. We've got nothing going on. So we'll just keep this. And the idea is, how can I split up the specular, the reflections, all this stuff on a per light basis? And so for now, what you need to do first off is you have a couple approaches. You can either do this with all the beauty, so each light renders the entire beauty, or you can do this on a per AOV basis and assemble it all in post. That's up to you. And so I'll show you a quick example of both. And so for now, let's move that out of the way, and let's just move this out of the way. We'll come back to the AOV render settings. And so now, if you have your lights, each light will have a special section in it. So if I select this dome light, right now the parameter, actually due to this just came out in this last 3 days ago, there was a string parameter issue, so the setting on the dome light for some reason isn't listed here. It's in the extra settings, so it's way down here. Normally in other lights regularly, there's a little section just called light groups. So expect that to show up here in the next release. It's just the string, when they coded it, accidentally slipped into the extra parameters. So if you go into your dome light, go to extra attributes and go to the bottom, you'll have AOV light group. So in here we're just going to type in dome. So that's the name we're going to use for this group, for this light specifically, only for the dome light. Now we've got two lights in front of the car. I'm going to do front 1, and again, here's a light group, hit enter. We're going to do the other light right here. We'll just call this front 2, and we've got a key light that's off camera, and we'll just call this key. We've got a fill light that's also off camera. We'll call that fill. And we've got another light that's off camera, and we'll call that kick. And you can actually put multiple lights on the same light group. So if I wanted both of these front lights to just be front, I could do that. Or you could split it. It's up to you. Actually, we'll do that just for this example. We'll make both of these lights part of the same group. And where were we? Kick. Okay, so now we've got all these walls in the back and up in the ceiling area, and so we're going to turn all these into wall lights. So let's go under here, under the light settings. You've got the light groups. We'll just call this wall. I'm just going to copy, paste, go to the next light, paste, next light, paste, next light, paste, and so on. And okay, cool. So now we've got all our light groups together. Now if I were to render this, we wouldn't get anything yet. And the reason is because you have to now make the AOVs. So if we come back to our render settings under the AOV tab, this is where you need to decide what you're planning to do with this. If you just don't want to split up the reflections and the refraction and all that stuff into its own per light AOVs, and you just want the beauties, which is basically what Corona is doing and other apps, you can just hit beauty and you'll have your beauty AOV. And now if you go into the settings for this beauty AOV, you'll get all the settings, and inside of here there's a new tab that's called light groups. And so pretty much almost all of these AOVs you can split up into light groups, except for two types basically, the raw and the filter. And the reason the raw and the filter can't be split up, it's just like a mathematical thing that right now you can't assemble it all back to the beauty if you do it that way. And so these can't be raw, and filter cannot be done into per individual light groups. But everything else, refractions and translucency, SSS, volume, all that stuff can be done. And so I'll actually go over all that in a second. Right now we're going to just use beauty. And so there's a couple options. There's all, which will use pretty much everything. And then there's the remainder, which will save the remainder of your let's say you had other lights that you didn't add to the light group. The remainder will give you all those extra, and it will just call it other when you assemble it. And so, for example, I'll actually show you right now. But so you'll get your option of adding all the light groups. So if I check this on, it activated all the light groups we just made. Or you could specifically choose dome, wall, kick, the ones we just made. And so for our example, we're going to just do all. And so if I render this now, and what's going to end up happening is, since we have this beauty pass, and it's being split up per each light group we created, what we're going to get is the beauty's going to look the same because it's the same beauty. But now, if we check under the AOV list, we've got this list. So we've got other, and other would basically equal the leftover lights. And that's what remainder mode means. Remainder basically just means make everything that's in this list, but if there's any other lights extra that we did not actually list in a light group, throw them all into this other extra section. And so right now there's only this front light, which is the other, and I shouldn't be there. Actually, I thought I named it correctly. Front. Oh yeah, it should be there. Huh. Did I leave a space? Okay, no, yeah, it should be right. And so what ends up happening is you've got all these AOVs. It finished rendering. And so if we go through here, we just scroll through, this is the beauty fill light. This is the front lights. This is the key light. This is our kick. This is the back wall lights. And this is the dome light. And so now, basically, you could composite all this together, and you could end up back with your beauty in Photoshop or Nuke or whatever, and you could adjust the strength of the overall lighting, the beauty influence. Now this is great. This is what, like I said, Corona and Maxwell and other engines do. But what if you wanted to break this up into the specular and different aspects, so you can control that even further? And that's the beauty of what per light AOVs let you actually do, is this is something that Redshift can do while Corona can't. And so the idea is, let's just get rid of this beauty. And what we're going to do is we're going to assemble our beauty back together using all the other kind of AOVs that we've got. And so, and have it broken up into individual per light attributes. And so if you don't know how to put it together or what AOVs you need, if you go to the documentation page for Redshift and you go under the AOV topics and AOV tutorial, there's a whole section on this, and pretty much it'll explain the files you need, how to actually put it all together in Nuke. I'm going to show you guys how to do it in Photoshop just because there's already this Nuke documentation, so you guys could figure it out. And I'll just do it in Photoshop since I haven't seen a Photoshop explanation for doing this, so I figured I'll cover that. And there's equation you need to know about, which is right here. And so this equation basically tells you to get your beauty, you need diffuse filter multiplied by diffuse lighting raw added to the diffuse filter multiplied by global illumination raw, and then you add diffuse filter plus subsurface scattering, specular lighting, reflections, refractions, etc., etc. And so this is basically the order of operations. So you got to look at this like math, and Photoshop has those operations. So multiply is multiply. You're going to multiply the diffuse lighting raw layer on top of the diffuse filter. And to do an additive operation, you're going to use linear dodge add. And so in Photoshop's EXR tools are kind of crappy, but you know, Nuke makes this way easier to do. But like I said, we're gonna do our example in Photoshop since people have asked about that, and it's a little different, and there's no actual article on this. And so, anyways, now that we know we need this stuff, so let's start off by getting our diffuse filter, diffuse lighting raw, and global illumination raw. And so we're gonna come in here, and like I said, the diffuse filter and raw you can't do per light for these because these are basically flat renders, but all the other stuff you can. So we're going to make a diffuse filter, diffuse lighting raw, global illumination raw, And now we're going to add the rest of the stuff. So we're going to go with reflections, go to our reflection setting, and we're going to use all light groups. And we're going to keep it on all mode instead of remainder. And so all mode basically just gives us everything. And now we're going to go to refractions. We'll add the refractions, go to the settings, turn on all light groups. And we're going to go to specular lighting. We're going to turn on all the light groups that we created. There's no SSS in this scene, so we don't need that. But there is volume. So we're going to go with the volume lighting. And we're going to turn on all the light groups for that. And so that should cover everything in the scene. I don't have any caustics or any emission or anything like that going on. And so if I render this now, we're going to get a ton of AOVs. And so if I click on the AOV section, now we've got all this stuff. So we've got our specular, our refractions, our reflections, and each one for its own dedicated light. So we've got the reflections front, reflections key, reflections kick, reflections wall, reflections dome light. We've got refractions. You get also the overall, which is just refractions, but you also get per light too. And so refractions front, refractions key, refractions kick, specular overall lighting, and then we've got specular lighting fill, specular lighting front, specular lighting key, specular lighting kick, specular lighting wall, specular lighting dome, volume lighting. And we should probably actually get rid of all of these because these are going to be blank, since the only lights that are actually influencing the volume are the front lights. So let's well, I could just delete them in Photoshop when I load it in, since they're the other lights I don't have volume contribution on. So if I go to the front lights and you check the volume, they actually have contribution, while the fill has 0. So that's why those AOVs are blank. So I probably should have, in my volume lighting section, only added front instead of all the others. But whatever. So cool. We've now got all our renders, AOV render, AOVs that we needed. So we've got all this stuff. And so the idea is, using all this, we can now put it all together and make our beauty, but we can now control on a per light level the strength, the color, the hue basically, or the strength of the light. And so now if we just save this out as a multi-layer EXR, you could save them out individually. It's up to you. Like when you make a batch render, for example, for an animation. But for us, we're just going to do a multi-layer. And something to keep in mind is there's options for your multi-layer. So for an EXR, there's compression options. I like Pixar 24. Gives us a little smaller file size, and the quality's still pretty good. And so anyways, we're going to do a save multi-layer EXR. We're going to save this out. We'll just call this comp car, and so now it's saved on my desktop, and we're gonna just open that up in Photoshop. File's actually still saving. It's gonna probably be pretty big since it's so many EXR files, so give that a second to write out still. And it's done. So a Photoshop plugin that I recommend everybody gets is EXR.io. It's free, and it just makes loading up EXRs in Photoshop easier. So we're going to hit open, give it a second to read in all this data. And so now we've got Photoshop open, and so we've got the beauty, and we've got all these passes on the side. Let's expand this a bit, or actually let's make the window bigger. And we'll just stick to this and move this up. And so we had all the volume passes, so let's actually close all this. And so these are all blank. This is the only one that has something in it. So let's get rid of all of these. And so we've got all these AOVs now. And there's the together AOV, which is everything together, which is this one, for all our specular stuff. So let's throw all our speculars into a folder. Oops. Select that, throw it into a folder. We'll just call this spec. Change the color to blue. So now we've got all our specular stuff in here by itself. We've got our volume on its own, and we'll just change this to violet so we can see it easier. And we're going to get rid of the overall specular, which is this one. We don't need it since we're going to composite everything back together. And so now we've got our refractions. The overall file will have the name RGBA without the name of your light group. So the rest have like dome, fill, etc., etc. And so we're going to throw that RGBA away. Select all these. And this is our refraction. So refract. And we'll just put this red. And our reflection group, we'll throw all this and call this reflect. And we'll just make that yellow. And then we'll get rid of this. And so now what we're left with is the diffuse filter files. And this is the beauty, the overall. And so we're left with this, which is just the flat shaded look. We've got the diffuse lighting, and we've got the GI raw. And so what you need to do, just like the equation says, you need to have diffuse filter multiplied by diffuse lighting. So we've got our diffuse filter here, and we need diffuse lighting to multiply on top. So you just go to your layer type and then change it to multiply. So now we've got that. So these two, we'll put these together in their own group. We'll just call this diff for diffuse lighting. And we now need to do the next part, which is diffuse filter multiplied by global illumination raw. So to do that, we've got our GI raw. We need to make another diffuse filter. So we'll make another diffuse filter, move it down. We'll hide this group. So now we've got the diffuse filter again, and now we've got our GI raw, and we need to multiply this also. And so we'll combine these two. And so what's going on now is we have to do this like a mathematical equation. There's order of operations. And so now we can add these two together. And so to add stuff, let's turn them both on now. We'll have this top layer go in as a linear dodge add. So now this is what we've got. And let's actually, oops, zoom out a bit. And so now we've kind of put it together a little more. And so we'll just call this diff GI, and we'll put these all the way at the bottom since they come first. So now it's all about just adding each effect that we've got on top. And so each of these, as you can see from the equation, are multiplies, or not multiplies, they're additive. So then specular lighting is added on top of, and reflections are added on top, and refractions are added on top, and so on. So always, if you can't remember this stuff, just check the reference again in the tutorials documentation section on AOVs, and all that information's there. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to add the volume fog. So we're going to turn this into a linear dodge add. And now we've got the volume fog in here. Next step is we're going to activate the specular, and we're going to go one by one, turning them into linear dodge add, or you could just select all of them holding shift and then selecting all those and then going to linear dodge add. And now we've gotten there. So now we can turn on the next set, hold shift, select all of those, linear dodge add, select these, and turn on linear dodge add. And so we're basically back to our beauty. Now you might be wondering, like, why is our beauty not as contrasty as our beauty in the render view? Let's go up to this. And the reason is because I'm using a LUT. And so I'll show you how to apply a LUT, basically the same LUT and stuff, into your Photoshop result. And one thing to keep in mind, actually, post effects like the photographic exposure and LUTs and stuff can't be baked out in a linear EXR image. It just doesn't work that way. LUTs are basically color transforms that are clamping down your values beyond 0 to 1 back down to 0 to 1. So just keep that in mind. This is only for preview purposes. If you can't bake out an EXR and composite it and have this information baked in. If you just want to save out a flat image with your LUT, all you got to do is just save it out as a PNG or an 8-bit or a 16-bit format. But 32-bit formats like EXRs, you can't bake this in. So keep that in mind. It's only for preview. And so let's get back to Photoshop here. And so now that we've got all this together, you can do some pretty neat things. And actually, let's bring in our LUT. We might as well do that right now. And so if you go to the bottom and you go to your adjustment layers, there's an option down here, and it's actually being cut off from the screen so you can't see it, but there's an option in the adjustment layer section that lets you load up a LUT, and it's called a color lookup. That's what a LUT's short for, a lookup table. And so under the 3D LUT section, just click this and then click on 3D LUT. You'll open up wherever your LUTs are, and I know exactly which LUT I was using. I was using this one, and I was using it at only 70% strength, and I also had the exposure cranked up in the render view a little bit. So I'm going to make another adjustment layer, an exposure adjustment layer, and I'm going to just crank up the exposure a pinch. And so now it's pretty much the same render. The exposure in the Redshift render view and in Photoshop isn't 1-to-1, so you're just going to have to play around with the numbers to get it to where you like it. And cool. So now I've got the render, and now I could have fun and tweak and adjust anything I want. So I could go in here, and I've got this volume. Let's build an adjustment layer on top. Let's add an exposure, and holding the Alt key, you drag, and in the middle you click, and it'll only affect this layer. So now I've got the exposure affecting only the volume. So if I increase this just like that, you'll notice I can turn it off. I can increase the volume, influence, so it looks like it's glowing more, dim it, And if you need to change the color, make another adjustment layer, a hue saturation. Let's bring it down here. Make sure that it's got this little arrow, so it means it's affecting only the volume. And now we could increase the saturation, shift the hue, and now our headlights are blue instead of the warmer color we had. Cool. We're satisfied with that. Let's move on. And so now we've got, let's maybe change the reflections to something. So let's turn on or off some reflections and see how they affect stuff. And that's pretty cool. Let's maybe change, let's change the reflections here on the side. So we'll come in here, we'll do the same thing. We could just duplicate these actually, and then just drag them up and connect them. And now we've got this, and we could, that might be too strong, but as you can see, you can increase that. Let's change the hue. Let's see. Let's change the hue to maybe this blue. Maybe the exposure's a little too strong. Something like that. And maybe let's do the same thing for that same light. Or maybe let's try another light. This is the dome light. Let's kick maybe, or the fill. Let's move it to the kick. Let's just see what we get. Now let's keep it back at the dome light. And so let's just copy these and move it down to our specular dome light. And now we've adjusted it here. Maybe that's too saturated for our taste. You can always decrease it. So yeah, I think you guys kind of get the idea now that pretty much I have full control of the specular, the reflection, the refraction, every kind of AOV you can think of, but on a per light basis. And so eventually you could mess around with these settings and get to a point where you're happy. And so for example, this is the same render, and earlier I rendered it out and did the same thing. I just adjusted it. Oops. And changed the colors this way. So now I had some purples in here and some darker blues. And it's the same thing. It's the same setup. It's the same render. It's just I darkened spots. I dimmed the light in the front, etc., etc. And so that's pretty much a summary of what you can do with this new feature. This feature lets you completely customize for compositing your renders to any liking you want. So if you thought your render looked good, and your boss says, hey, you need to adjust, this is too blue or this is too whatever, you could just tweak that in the compositing stage. And so this really opens up the doors to just having one render and all this control to tweak it all you want. And so another really cool feature that's going to be arriving pretty soon is Crypto Matte. And so if you guys haven't heard of that, that's a really powerful compositing tool also for creating matte IDs for everything in your scene. And so once that comes out, I think in the next couple weeks, I'll make a tutorial covering how to use that. And that system works in both Fusion, which is free, Blackmagic Design Fusion, and Nuke. And so you'll be able to use that to tweak whatever you want. And there's also custom AOVs. I should probably cover that soon too, which has been around for a couple months. And a lot of people have questions about what they're for and how to use them and stuff. And basically what custom AOVs let you do is make AOVs that aren't included in the list of AOVs. If I move this out of the way, come to our render. So the Redshift comes packaged with AOVs already, but custom AOVs let you make your own and let you customize them to do certain things. If you need an ambient occlusion, a special ambient occlusion, or a UV or whatever, you can make it with custom AOVs to whatever settings you need. And eventually, the developers are also planning on adding light path expressions. That's a little more advanced. That basically lets you create any AOV path you want, light path, basically by typing in, I guess you could say expressions, short code. So you could type in like diffuse on object whatever, refraction, and all this and this in just one code. And that's a lot more advanced. But in general, yeah, hopefully you guys, enjoy this new system for Redshift and have a blast compositing all your renders now that you could do whatever you want in post. Thanks again, guys, for supporting my Patreon, and just want to say I look forward to any cool stuff you guys make. Thanks.